But now we're going to move on to the next question. The history of Iran and Russia. Today, we see a picture that shows cooperation on just about every level. Very close diplomatic relations, economic ties, especially in energy. And now we're seeing for sort of the first time significant military ties. Iran has, from my understanding, always been reticent about engaging in this kind of military relationship with anybody, but especially the Russians. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was always tension between the Russian Empire and the Persian Empire back in the years leading up to World War One. In the Second World War, the Soviet Union invaded and occupied a significant part of Iran. They attempted to carve away part of it in Azerbaijan and create a Soviet republic. And I can tell you as a Marine, one of the scenarios we trained for was a Soviet invasion of Iran to capture Chabahar and Bandar Abbas. And, we were prepared to go into Iran to defend Iran from a Soviet incursion, without Iran's permission, by the way. But my point is, under no circumstances would my personal experience with Iran during the Cold War lead me to believe that Iran would have a close relationship with Russia. And yet, here we are. Cooperation in Syria, cooperation in, maybe you can answer this question. The Geranium-2 drone, it looks an awful lot like the Shahed 136. Is it?
Well, let me go back to the past, and you're absolutely correct. There has historically been a lot of grievances in Iran directed towards Russia and the Soviet Union. But I think some things have changed, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, in the sense that Russia grew much weaker than it was during the Soviet times. We no longer have borders except for borders through the Caspian Sea. But now that Central Asian countries and the countries in the Caucasus have gained independence, we don't have any land borders. And so Russia today is not much of a threat to Iran. In my opinion, it's not a threat to Iran, but just to be on the safe side for those skeptics and those Iranians who are Western-oriented, I would say that they're not much of a threat, so just so that I don't get them too angry. But in addition to that, our military cooperation with the Russians actually began after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And after a period of time, it grew more significant. But Russia and Iran were never all that close. I would say that the moment, and there are different events, of course, that we could look at, but I think the moment in which Iran and Russia grew somewhat closer to each other was over Syria. Because the Iranians in 2013, after it became clear that the tens of thousands of foreign fighters that were brought to Syria by NATO countries and oil-rich Arab countries in the Persian Gulf region, after they were beginning to overwhelm the Syrian government, ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the other Jaish al-Islam and Ahrar al-Sham and all these other groups, the Iranians decided to get involved to prevent the capital, Damascus, from falling. The same is true with Hezbollah and others. So the Iranian and Hezbollah's involvement began in 2013. So for a couple of years, for a while, they fought alongside the Syrian Arab Army against the extremist groups. And then General Soleimani went to Moscow to convince President Putin to get involved in Syria. And he succeeded in doing so. And that helped a lot because of the political cover that the Russians can give through their presence in the Security Council, and also because of the very effective air force that the Russians have. So basically the Russians were helping in the air, and the Iranians were supporting the Syrian Arab Army alongside Hezbollah and their allies on the ground. And that created a better relationship, or a closer relationship, or a better understanding between Russians and Iranians, who were constantly cooperating, and especially the military. But I would also say that another phase of, let's say, or second phase in this, I would say, convergence between the two sides was the war in Ukraine. Because the Iranians, or many Iranians, not all Iranians, because many Iranians only get their news from the West, and they get their news from the Persian media based in the West: BBC Persian, VOA Persian, Deutsche Welle Persian, France Radio International, and all these other outlets, Iran International, which is a Saudi outlet in London, and the rest. So, but for many Iranians, there was a lot of sympathy, those with knowledge about what was going on in Ukraine, because of the behavior, the similar pattern that we saw in Europe. It was very similar to what we ourselves experienced over the last 40-some years. NATO lying to Russia, advancing eastwards, carrying out a coup, supporting right-wing and fascist groups like the Azov Battalion, among others. That reminds Iranians of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and what they did in Syria and Libya and elsewhere, and of course the Contras in Nicaragua. But that's not so much in the Iranian. Most Iranians would not know much about that, but probably a lot of people in Central America would understand the relationship. But in any case, people understood that there were similar patterns here. And then, of course, the killing of Russian Ukrainians and the war in the Donbass. It for Iranians, I think it revealed a lot, because it sort of repeated what we had experienced in Afghanistan, how the Persian speakers and the Shias, the Tajiks, the Hazaras, the Uzbeks were massacred by the Taliban 20-some years ago, when they first took the country the first time around. Now the Taliban is a bit different from back then, but in any case, back then we had that experience. So many people understood the Russian position, and also NATO is a threat to Iran. If Ukraine succeeded in becoming a part of NATO, simultaneously we would have seen a new NATO member probably in the Caucasus, and then we would have more members. We have Armenia and Georgia, especially, and Azerbaijan. So for Iran, that would have been a major threat to their regional stability, to see NATO expand again to its borders. So that increased the relationship between Iran and Russia further. Iran has been exporting its technology to Russia. The Iranians don't deny it, although initially the Iranian Foreign Ministry, I think, made an unwise statement, which was incorrect, that we didn't send any drones to Russia. But then they corrected that and said we sent a limited number, but of course the word limited can mean different things to different people. But the point is that the Iranians, when they sell their drones to Russia, they don't tell the Russians what to do with the weapons that they purchase, or any other weapons that the Russians purchase from Iran, just as the Russians do not tell us what to do with weapons that we purchase from them. So the relationship between the two is increasingly strengthening, but it's not just the military. The Russians now need Iran much more than before, because relations with Europe have been destroyed, and they need a corridor, a trade route to Africa, to the Indian subcontinent, and to East Asia. And that corridor would go through Iran, whether it's through the Caspian Sea and to Iranian ports, or through the west or the east of the Caspian Sea. In other words, railway links, highways that go through Azerbaijan, potentially Armenia and Georgia, and also through Turkmenistan and Central Asia. So this north-south corridor is being developed as we speak, and also Iranian trade has been booming, Iranian-Russian trade, because of the sanctions. So Iran is now becoming a major trade route. A north-south corridor is developing, and so you have both a growing economic relationship, especially since the two countries are now sanctioned. So no one lives in fear of being sanctioned due to bilateral trade. So the military relationship, the political relationship, and the economic relationship has been enhanced significantly over the past 11 months. I've lost your voice, Scott.
Yeah, no, my dogs were barking in the background, so I was trying to keep them from interfering with the show. But they're silent now. So I'm going to throw out three terms and then ask you to expand on them, what they mean for Russian-Iranian relations. The first term is BRICS. The second term will be the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the third will be the CSTO, basically the Commonwealth States Treaty Organization. What do these three terms mean to Iran, and how do they impact Iran's relationship with Russia and Iran's relationship with the rest of the world?
Well, Iran isn't a member of BRICS yet, but I think Iran is moving in that direction. Iran is a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but all three of these, I think, reflect a changing world, and the fact that Iran wants to become a part of that changing and evolving world. These organizations exclude the West. That's what's mutual about all three of them. They are comprised of different countries in the global south. Some of them are Asian, and some of them include Africa and the Americas, Latin America to be precise. Iran sees the West as on the decline. Iran doesn't have some, one of the things that you often hear in the Western media is that Iran defines itself through a hatred towards the West, which isn't true. But as long as Iran can't solve its problems with the United States and Europe, then Iran is going to explore new opportunities. And, lo and behold, as Iran is looking for new partners and new opportunities, we see the rise of these powers in Asia and in the global south that make it a lot more easy for Iran to resist Western sanctions and Western pressure and Western military threats. Of course, those threats have died down now, but the sanctions that Western countries have imposed upon Iran. So if Europe and the United States were to change their behavior towards Iran, and if they were to be reasonable, I think they would do that because they need Iran, especially with the rising tensions with Russia and China taking place at the same time. You'd think that Western countries would rethink their policy towards Iran, but I think they're too emotional. The United States has never forgiven Iran for the revolution, and also there's the Israeli factor. Western countries prioritize the Israeli regime over everything else in this region, whereas the Iranians consider the Israeli regime to be an apartheid regime, that carries out ethnic cleansing and so on, and therefore the Iranians see it as illegitimate, like apartheid South Africa. And the solution in the eyes of Iranians has to be like the solution that we saw in South Africa. But in any case, the rise of these new powers create a whole new situation for Iran. For example, when President Raisi went to the recent Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Uzbekistan, and Iran officially basically joined the organization then, that country is actually itself, the whole of Central Asia is a very rich part of the world, and it connects Iran to Eastern Russia, to Central Russia, and to China. So this organization alone provides a huge network for Iran to be a part of. And then through cooperation, through these organizations, we see tariffs being removed. We now see that the Iranians and the Russians have created an alternative to trade, their own SWIFT, because both countries have been excluded from SWIFT. So now that they've created their own SWIFT, and that creates enormous opportunities. And there are a number of other countries that are part of this, that use this mechanism as well. So we see this rapidly changing situation. That doesn't mean the situation in Iran isn't difficult. The sanctions have an impact. But I think as we move forward, and as the West is consuming